All right, ready to dive in. Today we're looking at the impact of social media, how it affects things like learning, relationships, and even time management. And get this, our main source is actually a YouTube video.
A YouTube video.
Yeah, it's called Learn English with Podcast Conversation. Episode 2, English Podcast for Beginners, hashtag English Podcast.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's from a channel called Speak English Smartly. And what's interesting is in this episode, they kind of go off on a tangent talking about love marriages versus arranged marriages.
Wow, that is a bit of a twist. English learning and marriage customs, how do those connect?
Right. Well, they start with this story about a student, Anna, who's kind of struggling with social media addiction, always on her phone.
I think we all know an Anna.
Totally. And because of all that scrolling, her grades have been slipping, even failed a big exam because of it.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be an issue. That constant pull to check your phone, definitely relatable.
But here's where it gets interesting. They actually use Anna's story to talk about the potential downsides of love marriages.
Oh, okay, how so?
They're saying that the freedom to choose in a love marriage can sometimes lead to distractions, bad decisions, especially when you're young.
That's a pretty bold statement. Do they elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, they talk about how the intense emotions of love, especially early on, can cloud your judgment, lead to impulsive choices.
I see.
They even go as far as to say that heartbreak, like what Anna went through after a breakup, can be so bad it affects other parts of your life, academics even.
So are they suggesting that practicality trumps love, at least when it comes to marriage?
You got it.
Yeah.
And that's where arranged marriages come in. They're contrasting Anna's experience with this idea that arranged marriages, maybe they don't focus on romantic love, but they offer stability, a supportive environment.
Interesting. But isn't there a lot of variation in how arranged marriages work depending on the culture?
You're right. The podcast doesn't really get into those nuances. They're more focused on the idea of having family involved in this big life decision.
Gotcha. So it's less about the specifics of arranged marriage and more about that broader concept of family guidance and support.
Exactly. What I find fascinating is that they're using social media, something so often associated with instant gratification and superficial connections, to discuss something as profound as marriage.
Yeah, it really makes you think. And they even admit to struggling with social media addiction themselves, spending hours scrolling.
It's so easy to fall into that trap that need to be constantly connected.
Right, but then they connect that back to the love marriage debate. Pretty clever.
How so?
Well, they're suggesting that all those idealized versions of love and relationships we see on social media, they actually fuel that desire for instant gratification, the passionate romance, which, in their view, makes young people more susceptible to making those impulsive choices that can lead to problems in a love marriage.
Whoa, that is fascinating. So social media might be shaping our whole idea of what a good relationship even looks like.
And that could have ripple effects way beyond just romantic relationships, right?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what else it's influencing.
Big questions to consider, for sure. But before we get too philosophical, we got to talk about this social media addiction thing. It's not just about wasting time. There are real psychological consequences.
Yeah, they touched on that. The impacts on mental health, sleep, even real-life relationships.
And it's not just by chance. These platforms are designed to keep us hooked.
What do you mean?
Think about it. Notifications, likes, endless scrolling, it's all triggering our brain's reward system, keeps us coming back for more.
So it's not just a lack of willpower, we're actually being played.
In a way, yes. And that's why it's so important to be aware of those tactics, develop strategies to use social media in a healthier way.
Okay, a lot to unpack here. Social media's impact goes way deeper than we think. Affects everything from how we learn to how we relate to each other and even our mental well-being.
Absolutely. And that marriage debate, unexpected as it was, really gives us a glimpse into how social media shapes our views on some of life's biggest decisions. So what's next? Do we dive deeper into the psychology of addiction or explore those different cultural perspectives on marriage?
I think both paths are worth exploring. But maybe let's start by looking at how this curated reality of social media might be distorting our perceptions of love and marriage.
I'm in. Let's see how those filtered Instagram posts and carefully crafted relationship statuses might be setting us up for unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
Stick with us. This is just the beginning.
It's wild how this English learning podcast used social media to jump into a topic as complex as marriage really shows how intertwined these platforms are with our lives, shaping how we see love and relationships.
What's interesting is that contrast they make, the problems with love marriages using Anna's story, and then the stability of arranged marriages. It's like challenging that Western idea of romantic love being the foundation of a good marriage.
Yeah, it makes you think twice about some pretty ingrained beliefs, especially when you see how social media pushes that romantic ideal, all those perfect couples, the fairy tale weddings.
Exactly, and seeing that curated version of reality all the time, it can really mess with your expectations. We start thinking our own relationships should be that perfect, and then, well, disappointment, insecurity, even conflict.
It's like we're told our love stories should be epic and effortless, just like in the movies or those Instagram feeds.
Right, and when real life doesn't match up, it's easy to feel like you're doing something wrong or your relationship is missing something.
The podcast actually talks about this, how social media influences how we see love. They argue that seeing those idealized relationships all the time can make you crave that instant gratification, the passionate romance, and they think that makes young people more likely to fall into the traps of a love marriage.
Interesting. So, are they implying that arranged marriages with the focus on practicality and family might actually be better at handling the pressures of this hyper-connected world?
They don't say it directly, but that seems to be the idea. They see arranged marriages as a more, I guess, level-headed way to find a partner, one that puts compatibility, family support, and long-term stability ahead of that potentially fleeting, passionate love.
It's important to remember, though, that arranged marriages aren't always a guarantee of happiness or even success. And the podcast, while it gives us a different cultural viewpoint, doesn't really get into the potential problems with arranged marriages.
Very true, and we have to acknowledge that there's a huge range of experiences within arranged marriages. Some people might feel like they have a choice, while others might feel pressure and forced into it.
Exactly. It's not something simple you can just put into categories. But I think the podcast brings up some important questions about how relationships are changing in this digital age.
I agree, and it's bigger than just marriage, right? It's about how social media shapes our expectations and behaviors in all our relationships, from friends to family.
Absolutely. And it's important to be aware of those influences so we can make conscious choices about how we use these platforms, how we handle relationships in a world that's more and more driven by technology.
Okay, so what can we actually do to lessen these negative influences? The podcast talks about setting time limits, taking breaks from social media. What else would you suggest?
I think mindfulness is key. It's about noticing your social media habits, being aware of when you're feeling envious or inadequate or pressured to look a certain way online.
What about curating our feeds? Is that a good way to avoid those idealized versions of reality?
Absolutely. We can choose what we see on social media. Unfollow accounts that make you feel bad and follow those that inspire you, make you feel good, and show a more authentic view of life and relationships.
So it's about taking back some control. Instead of letting social media tell us what to think and expect, we can make our online experience more positive.
Exactly. And that change in thinking can spread not just online, but to your offline relationships too.
It's interesting. Social media might be contributing to that pressure to have the perfect relationship, but it also offers tools for connection and support. It's all about finding that balance, right?
For sure. And realizing that real relationships, with all their messiness and imperfections, are way more valuable and fulfilling than the picture-perfect versions we see online.
That's something we all need to hear, especially when it's so easy to get caught up comparing ourselves to others. But before we get too deep into solutions, let's talk about the very real issue of social media addiction.
It's not just about willpower, like we said before. These platforms are designed to be addictive, using our own psychology against us.
So what can we do? How do we break free and take back our time and attention?
Well, there are strategies that work. One is to understand how it works on your brain. By realizing how social media triggers your reward system, you can start to see those patterns and develop healthier ways to cope.
It's like figuring out the tricks they're using, right?
Yeah, exactly. Once you know the game, you can change the rules.
So we're not saying social media is all bad, but we need to be smarter about how we use it, know the risks, and have strategies to deal with them.
It's about taking control of your time, your attention, and in the end, your well-being.
That's a powerful message and makes me wonder about the bigger picture. If we can learn to manage our relationship with social media, maybe we can learn to manage our relationship with technology as a whole.
That's a great point, something we should all be thinking about as we navigate this digital world.
And as we finish up this part of our deep dives, let's go back to that unexpected connection we've been talking about, the link between social media and the whole love marriage versus arranged marriage debate.
It reminds us that even topics that seem completely separate can be connected in surprising ways, and that social media's influence goes way beyond just what we do online. It shapes how we think, what we believe, and even the choices we make in the real world.
It's really amazing how an English learning podcast took us on this deep dive into social media and how it affects our lives. You wouldn't think learning a language would spark these kind of conversations.
It just shows you how connected things really are. Social media isn't just for chatting or entertainment anymore. It's shaping our values, our beliefs, even how we see love and relationships.
And as we've been talking about, that influence isn't always a good thing. The stuff we see on these platforms, that curated reality, can really distort how we see things, setting us up for unrealistic expectations and feeding that need for instant gratification.
It's almost like looking at the world through a filter, one that erases all the imperfections and messiness of real life. We see all these perfect couples, perfect bodies, perfect moments, and it makes our own lives feel kind of inadequate.
And that constant comparing ourselves to others can be really damaging to our self-esteem and our relationships. You start to second-guess your choices, your partner, even if you deserve love and happiness.
It's important to remember that what you see on social media, it's usually a carefully constructed image. People want to show their best side, highlight the good stuff, and hide the struggles. It's not the whole picture.
Like everyone's trying to win at life, and we all feel like we're losing.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to be critical when you're on social media. You need to be able to separate what's real from what's fake, what's staged, and what's spontaneous.
The podcast had some good advice about this. They talked about being more intentional about who you follow, choosing accounts that inspire you, lift you up, and give you a more balanced perspective on life.
That's a good place to start. It's about taking charge of your experience online, making it a space that's good for your well-being, less about negativity and comparing yourself to others.
And it's not just about what you see, but how you participate. Are you being real, sharing your own stories, building actual relationships, or are you just adding to the noise, trying to get likes and comments?
Something to think about for sure. Maybe the real revolution in social media, the one that leads to something good, isn't about ditching it altogether, but changing how we use it.
So what if, instead of trying to look perfect, we use social media to share our vulnerabilities, our struggles, the real stuff?
Imagine if social media became a place for real connection, empathy, support, a place where we celebrate our imperfections and help each other out.
I love that. And it starts with each of us making small changes in how we act online.
It could be something small, like leaving a supportive comment on a friend's post, or sharing your own story that might help someone else.
Or maybe it's unfollowing accounts that make you feel bad and following ones that inspire you, teach you something, or just make you laugh.
Every little intentional act can make a difference, creating a ripple effect of positivity that goes beyond your own screen.
It's about shifting the focus, less about promoting yourself and more about connecting with others, less about seeking approval and more about offering support.
And who knows, maybe that change in perspective could even change how we approach relationships in the real world. If we can be more real and vulnerable online, maybe we can create a culture that values those same things when we interact face to face.
That's a hopeful thought, that maybe changing how we connect online can change how we connect with each other in real life.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one last thing to think about. Next time you open your social media app, take a second to ask yourself, why am I here? Am I trying to connect, learn, inspire, or am I just letting it suck up my time and attention?
That's a powerful question to ask yourself, and the answer is totally up to you. Choose wisely, connect authentically, and remember, true happiness isn't about the perfect online persona. It's about the messy, beautiful reality of being human.
Until next time.